I figured for sure somebody would throw a 50th anniversary party for us. I wasn't positive, but I figured they probably would. And so I was going to read it then. I never got that chance because she died on our 48th. So that letter's gone, and I don't get to see it anymore. But I wished I could have got to read it because I miss her. Why did I do that? I worked for an oil company for almost 4 years when God said, I want you to go back to school. I could not understand why. I did not like school. But it seemed very clear that God was telling me I needed to go back and finish my bachelor's degree. So when I talked to Marlene, she said, okay, I'll support you. But here's the deal. I will have to work full-time, and I expect you're going to have to try and find a part-time job. And we've got 2 kids, and it'll be your job to find the babysitters. And then there's one more thing. There's only 2 people in this world that can read your writing. That's me and you. Therefore, I'll have to type all your letters, or all your papers, all your classwork. And so therefore, if I have to do that for you, you will work in school this time. You will make it worth my while. Well, that was the truth. I would have never gotten anything on any paper if the professor had to read my writing, and I couldn't type. I took typing in grade 10 because it was part of my course curriculum. Never wrote one test. Every time the teacher announced a test, oh, and this dates me also, I'd take that little elastic off the back of the carriage, it would go. And while she'd bring me the tools, and I'd fish that thing out while everybody else was doing a test. And never wrote one all year. One day I got really creative, and I took all the keys off, the letters off the keys, mixed them all up, put them back on. And she came to my next class just hotter than a firecracker. What do you think you're doing, Gerry? I said, well, I do recall you saying we're supposed to look at the paper and memorize them, so I didn't think it mattered. Where everybody's fingers knew where those keys were, so I didn't think it mattered. Well, that didn't help a whole lot. But I did prove that year that teachers, those of you who are teachers, some teachers will pass you just to get rid of you. Amen. Because she came to me at the end of the year and she said, Gerry, I know you're doing a matriculation curriculum, and I know you need 5 credits of typing in order to get that. And she said, I'm willing to give you a C to get them if you promise never to come back. Well, I was quite good with that because I didn't like typing. So anyway, I was a mischievous little fellow in school. I did go back to college in 1972, and I did attempt. In fact, I made it my goal, and I do like to achieve my goals. If I say I will do something, you can rest assured that something really serious goes wrong if I don't do it. So I told Marlene, okay, here's the deal. In order for you not to have an extra year of this prolonged, I will finish my degree course in 4 years, even though I flunked the first one. That means I'm doing 4 years in 3. And I will do well, and I will look after the babysitting. So, all well and good. As I said, 16 hours are our credits are a semester. I had 3 years of college work. I took 2 of those semesters, I did 23 hours. All of them I did 18, the rest I did 16. Every summer I took a summer course and a correspondence course. And when college was over and I graduated, I had 2 papers left to hand in, but I got an extension so that in July, I handed them in and I got my degree. But with God's help and a little bit of determination and persistence, I flunked 1 year, so I did 4 years in 3, and I still ended up with a 3.2 GPA. So it can be done if we decide to do it. And we can serve God the same way with that same determination and zeal. Graduation came. We had our graduation ceremonies. Marlene even went to my commencement ceremonies with me. She sat there after the ceremonies at, I don't know what time it was, 2:30 or so when we were doing that, and there's this long line. I don't know, there's a couple hundred people there, and all the graduates have to do this afterwards, so this receiving line. And she stood there with me doing it, and at that time her contractions were less than 5 minutes apart. And so when it was done, she said, okay, let's go get the bag and we'll go to the hospital. So we did, and we got home. She said, I need a rest first. So she laid down, had an hour's rest, and then we got the bag and went to the hospital, and our third son, David, was born at 4:30. The phones had already been shut off. The gas, water, everything had already been shut off because we were moving. We knew we were coming to Oyen. He was born on the 11th of April. On the 18th of April, we moved into a little house right beside the bottle depot. I don't know if anybody lives in that little house anymore, but we did for a while. Because the parsonage here was not ready yet, Dennis and Linda were living in the parsonage in Acadia Valley. So by the time, then in the summer, we got that done. July, we moved to Acadia Valley, and that's where we pastored, in Acadia Valley. Many of you will remember Peter Dick. He was my great uncle. And he was so thrilled when I came out here because none of his protege genealogies, or whatever you call the people that come after him, ever went into the pastorate. And he was so excited that he had a nephew who was going to be a pastor. And you should have seen his face when I resigned and left the pastorate. He just about had a heart attack. He was a great man. You will remember him, those of you who were here in those years. Ed and Marilyn aren't here, but they would recall. I was working for a farm machinery dealership after that in 1981, and Ed came and said, Gerry, I'd like you to come back to the farm and farm with me. So we did. We moved back. And Marlene said, well, can we live in Alberta because I don't want to send the kids to Alsace and Marengo. And so we decided to buy the quarter section that Brenton lives on today from Ed and build a yard there. And there was nothing there at the time, not a road, not power, not a well, nothing. And we built a yard and a home in that yard where Brenton lives today. There was a problem, though, in that, remember, those were 1983, 84, and 85. Oh, some of you don't even have a clue when those years were. But my farm loan and operating loan was 23% interest. My mortgage on my house was 25% interest. And as you can well believe, it only took 2.5 years for me to get economically phased out of farming. And that's when I joined the oil company again in 1985. I started to work for Placer in Bind Loss. We bought a house in the valley, lived there until 1988, when the company moved me to the office in Brooks. I was still in the area a lot until 1992 when the company sold, and the new company moved me to the Sundre office. 1983, 84, they said, you're moving to the Calgary office, and so I moved to Didsbury and commuted to Calgary. 1986, they sold, and that was the first time out of 5 sales and mergers with an oil company that I got my handshake. So I started to work for a reclamation company, did various jobs, and then I realized that I just wasn't being fulfilled. Don't get me wrong, the oil patch was good to me. I enjoyed it. During that time, I went to an online school, did a lot of correspondence work, and over the course of about 10 years, I got my MBA. And you say, he hated school. What's he doing with a master's degree? Only because the oil company said, if you want to continue in your supervisory capacity, you got to have one. So I said, okay. I did it. And, but I got to thinking that this just isn't what I want to be anymore, even though I'd been in it now for 25 years. So I said to God one day, I'm going to backtrack all the way back to 18. That's when I made my first vow, uniquely characteristic for me. No, I'm not going to say it's a vow because that word is, I promised God this. I heard a message on tithing one time, and I was 18. I said to God, I'm going to do that. You see, just prior to that, from 16 to 18 were my rebellious years. When I was 16 years old, I walked in, our church was across the street from our house. Dad's office was in the basement of the house, but when he did personal counseling, he took people across to the church where it was quiet and more private. Well, I had to get something from the church, and I walked into the church as he was having a conversation with the mother of my best friend in the community. And these are the words I heard. If your son had been more of an example, my son would not be off the rails as he is today. So I heard myself get blamed for him smoking and doing a little drinking and getting off the rails. Well, I was in my rebellious states too. I really wasn't as far off the rails as he was at the time. But my mind said, fortunately, she didn't hear me, so I was never held accountable for it. But my mind said, lady, you ain't seen nothing yet. And that score went until I was 18. One day, my sister was home from Toronto. She went to university in Toronto, and in the summer, she was home, and we went for a drive. She said, let's go for a drive. So we were driving down the road, and she just turned to me, and she said, Gerry, when in the world are you going to smarten up? And I knew exactly what she meant, because she never talked to anybody without talking about Jesus. And I looked at her, and I thought, I can't even answer. So I reached under my seat, took my carton of cigarettes, pitched it out the window, and I said, how about now? Never smoked again. Got home, made my restitution with God at that moment. And a month later, I heard a message on tithing. So I said, Lord, here's my deal. If I can make a deal with you, here's my deal. I will, for the rest of my life, tithe 10% of my gross salary. Not my net, not my take home, my gross. I will faithfully do that. Now, I have to admit there's been a couple of months in the last 60 years that I haven't made it, but I've made it up. I've kept that promise. And I said, but along with that, I'll step out in faith and say that I will give you an offering of 20% of every dollar that comes to me unexpectedly. Sell a car, win a lottery, whatever. And I've kept that promise as well. I didn't think this was going to be hard. My story hasn't been that rough. I haven't been shot in the belly like Steve. I haven't been picked up out of a gutter like some people we know. I haven't been hit with a bolt of lightning like others. I was raised in a really good, solid Christian home. Life was just kind of smooth with a couple bumps. When I lost my job with the oil company, I worked for a handy bus company in Calgary for 5 years. It was okay, but it wasn't okay. So one day when I was feeling like things weren't going the best, I said to God, you know, God, I'm okay to be here for now, but I want you to arrange for me to finish my career as the facilities director at our college or at our camp. And you've all heard before how much camp means to me. 1 year after I asked that request, I got an offer to be the facilities director at Taylor University College in Edmonton. Now, that's North American Baptist College. It's not ours, but hey, it was a Bible school. So I took it, and I really loved it. I really enjoyed that. That was great. 2 years, they shut the university down, and they only had the seminary left, and they didn't need a bunch of us, and I got my walk-in papers. 2 weeks after they gave me my pink slip, the executive director of River's Edge Camp phoned me and said, Gerry, don't take a job without coming and talking to me. And in May of 2009, I went to River's Edge as the maintenance manager. I was able to get some unemployment insurance, so I volunteered for the first year. On June the 10th, 2010, I became an employee there and was there until last June when I retired. God honored both of those requests, not just one. I was sitting in February in my bachelor suite at the camp. When Marlene got sick, we downsized considerably so that I could look after her. When she passed away, I moved into a bachelor suite at the camp that had 2 rooms, and I downsized to the point where I had a few of my personal tools. Other than that, I had nothing except my bed. I had a bed. Every other piece in that apartment belonged to the camp. And I was sitting there on the couch one night a year ago, February, and I said, God, this does not affect my faith in any way, shape, or form. It does not affect my trust in you in any way. It does not affect the fact, it doesn't mean that I'm worried about where things are going, because you've told me not to worry, that you'd look after me, and I know you will. I know you love the sparrow that falls. I know you love and dress the lily that fades away, and I think you probably like me a little more than them. So I'm okay. But I want you to know, if I don't have River's Edge, I have absolutely nothing. And that's a bit uncomfortable. 2 weeks to the day, I get a phone call from Chad Skapik and said, Gerry, we'd like you to come out and buy Dad's house. Ooh, I had never thought about coming back to Acadia Valley. I loved to hear when we were here, but I had never thought about coming back. So I said I'd give it some thought. I phoned him back. That was a Tuesday. I phoned him back on Thursday, said, I'm sorry, it just can't work. There's no way. I go to the bank and I say, no job, no address. They say no money. And I said, where am I going to find $150,000? And he said, well, we've decided that we'll give you a deal and take $20,000 off of that price for you. So I said, okay, I'm interested. I'll come out and see you. I didn't have a clue where it was going to come from. I knew I couldn't find 130 any more than I could find 150. But I thought, I haven't been to the valley in a long time. I should go out and visit. I drove out here. I visited with Chad and Trent for half an hour. And I said, I can't make this work, but if you guys will help me, I think I can. I said, you do one of 2 things for me, and we can make a deal. And those are, you either carry the mortgage for 3 to 4 years for me until I get established, and then I'll get a mortgage, or you give me at least a purchase option for 3 to 4 years, and then I'll exercise the option and make it work. And I also would like, if you don't mind, I'll look after all of the maintenance and all of the normal things like an owner would, if you'll give me back 100% of my rent payments as a down payment. So here I'm asking for a little more, but I figured I might as well be bold. And they said, yeah, we think we can do that. So we'll pick which one, but I said, okay, let's make a deal. And Trent said, no, Gerry, we can't make a deal today. And I thought, that's really weird. He said, we've decided there's 2 caveats that you have to agree to before we can make a deal. And I said, okay. So the first one is, we know how much our dad meant to you, and we know how much you meant to our dad, and we know how much our dad would want you to have his house. So we're going to take another $15,000 off the price. Well, I'm thinking, I guess I can live with that. What's the other one? Can't be too bad. And then he said, we hate garage sales and we hate thrift stores, and so we want to just hand you the keys. And what you see, you get. So I acquired a 1,300 square foot house on a 980-foot basement, 100% fully furnished, 4-bedroom, 3-bath, 2-car heated garage, 3 city lots. Is that a God deal or what? We made a deal and I moved. And here I are. You guys get me back. Shouldn't that be nice? And the 2nd of June this year, it's not easy being on a fixed income and trying to make everything all ends meet. And I did have a few debts that I carried out here with me. And so I was looking for ways to make a little extra income. And And Clint Nielsen came to the plate really nicely for spring and fall, and that really helps. But I get a phone call from my friend who was my partner at River's Edge. In 2013, River's Edge was forced to put in a water treatment plant. I designed it and built it, and then got my water license to run it. And I ran it for 3 years, and then gave it over to Jordan, who was my partner. And he left, and then Kelly took it, and I was just their assistant holiday relief guy until last June. But Jordan phoned me, and he said, Gerry, I was talking to Harold Johnsrud this morning in church. That's in Didsbury. And he asked me if I wanted to be the water tech at Empress. And of course not. Jordan lives in Didsbury. He commutes to Three Hills every day to be the water tech there. Why would he, he said, commute's too far, can't do it. So they just kind of snickered and went on their way. On his way home from church, he said, the light came on, and he said, but I do know a Class 1 license that lives out there. So he phoned me, and he said, Gerry, you better phone Empress and just check, because they're looking for a water tech, and they need him desperately. So that started where I'm at today. On Monday this past week, I started my job as the water tech in Empress. And that's going okay. You kind of get thrown to the wolves. In this business, in the oil patch, whatever, you kind of get thrown to the wolves. I got thrown to the wolves when I started operating in buying loss. Like the guy drove me to the gas plant, and I got out of the car. He never got out of the car. I got out, and he shut the door, rolled down the window, and says, your truck's over there, and this is your field, and I'll see you later. So, those things happen. Well, on Monday, I get down there. Things are running pretty well. At 4 o'clock on Monday, there's a power outage 9 hours long. Go down there on Tuesday, get things up and running. At 9:30, there's a power outage over 2 hours long. Get it going again. Wednesday's not too bad. On Thursday, there's a major water leak that I have to shut the plant down, take apart to fix. This morning at 5 o'clock, I get a call out for chlorine trouble. So, it's just part of the package. So I went down and fixed it. Before I got here this morning, I got another alarm. The same thing happened. So when I leave here, I'm heading down there to fix that again. But, I needed some income, and there it was. God is so good. And my time's up. But I would like to make quick reference to the book of Nehemiah, because I said I was going to do that. If you look at the book of Nehemiah, and I would like you all to read the entire book in one sitting when you get an opportunity. Nehemiah was a godly man, a slave. One of those guys that God just really blessed. You remember Joseph, and you remember Daniel, and you remember the 3 Hebrew children. And those guys that were taken from Jewish towns, thrown into slavery, and yet because of their love and trust in God were so faithful, they became governors and kings and whatever it was. They led second to the king in their country. Nehemiah was the cupbearer to the king. And that is quite a task, because he's not only important enough that the king picked him to come into his chambers, but whenever the king wanted a drink, he had to take the cup to the king. In the presence of the king, he had to have a drink, because it was the king's way of saying, if you die, I ain't gonna. So that was, a huge responsibility to the king, but he took his life in his hands every time he picked up that cup. And his brother was over in Jerusalem, and when he came back, he asked him what things were like there, and he said, they're shambles, they're terrible, it's a disaster. And Nehemiah went into a funk, a real serious funk. And he said, when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned, fasted, and prayed before God of heaven. Then I said, and he made a prayer to God, that I'm going to go ask the king. And normal people weren't allowed to go in and make a request of the king. He said, I'm going to go ask him. And he prayed, remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses. And he prayed a long prayer again. He tried to make restitution for his people and all the terrible things they'd done. And then he went to the king. And there was another rule that the cupbearer had to have when he went to the king. He had, under no circumstances could he be sad. He had to be happy. If he was not happy, the king's javelin pierced his chest. Like, how does that work? Well, those kind of kings, they had that kind of rule. And he went into the king's presence sad. And the king said, "You have never had a sad countenance before. Why are you sad?" And he was able to explain to the king why he was sad. Wouldn't you be sad if your mother country was in disaster and ruins? Your people had all been taken into slavery and yada, yada, yada. And the king's response was unique, and I think it kind of set Nehemiah on his heels a little bit when the king said, "What is it you want?" Like, whoa. And again, we have a quick statement that says, "Then I prayed to the God of heaven." We don't know what he said, but I think we can conjecture and imagine what he might have said. And he said to the king, "I want to go and rebuild my city." Again, he wants to leave. He wants to get out of here. And he knew the king could be giving him trouble. But the king and the queen, both in unison at that point, their response was, "How long will you be gone?" We don't know. Nehemiah doesn't say how long he would be gone, but we know he gave them a time. Because at the end of the chapter, we're going to read that he had to go back. And then he ran into all these kinds of difficulty. But you can, as you read it, go through it, you'll see all the times Daniel prayed. Sanballat gave him trouble, and he prayed. Sanballat gave him more trouble and became angry, and he prayed. And he would say, "Hear us, our God, for we are despised." And you can see in his prayers how often he prays for forgiveness for his people. He was one of his people. He was not one of the perpetrators. But he included himself. He said, "Me and our people have disobeyed. We have made you angry. We have turned against you. We have repented. We have turned against you. We have repented. We have turned against you." And all the way through the book, it says that. And it says, he prayed. Chapter 6, more he prayed. More he prayed. "But I prayed, now strengthen my hands." He's now rebuilding the walls. And all the people joined him. And now there was a fair bunch of people that had gone back with him and with Zerubbabel's group that went back before that. I'm trying to think here really quickly, like 42,000 and lots of mules and lots of slaves, and everybody went back. When they got the wall built, they had all kinds of trouble getting that wall built. They got it done. I'm already up to chapter 9. And again, he prayed, "Blessed be your glorious name. You are Lord of God who chose Abraham. You saw the suffering of our ancestors in Egypt. You came down Mount Sinai and gave Moses the law. Because of your great compassion, you did not abandon them in the wilderness." Now, they had some trouble they had to make because all those guys who said, "We don't want to go in there," had to die first before the rest could go into the land. But they disobeyed God, asked for kings, and God gave them kings. And Nehemiah makes a long dissertation on reminding God about all these things. Did God need to be reminded? No. But Nehemiah's mind did. He knew that he needed to list these things and individually ask forgiveness for them. Now the wall is built. And here's just a little bit about the size of that wall. Now, we do know that there's 42,000 people there, so there's lots of people building this wall. But this is the wall of Jerusalem rebuilt to its original construction standards. And we might say, okay, it's a little wall. We think of our white picket fence. No. He said, "I had all the leaders of Judea go on top of the wall." We don't know how many that is. "I also assigned 2 large choirs to give thanks. One proceeded on the wall to the right," that's the left, to the right. "Another proceeded on the wall to the left. And these 2 large choirs were on that wall. Even if they went 3 people abreast, that's at least a 10-foot wide wall. They probably were 4 to 6 people abreast. And this wall is approximately 3 meters high. So that's a lot of rocks put together. And they did it in 53 days. Because God was with them. And God saw it. And then in chapter 13, the last chapter is where I want to end because we run out of the book. But we know there that Nehemiah had to go, he kept his promise. And that's what I'm trying to get here. Nehemiah was a man of integrity. He kept his promise because he said, while all these things were going on, I was not in Jerusalem. For in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I returned to the king. And then sometime later, I asked his permission to come back to Jerusalem. So Nehemiah, the governor, who had brought all these things into place, who had asked all these people to do all this work, and they had agreed, who had asked all these people to recommit themselves to their God, and they did. They even signed their name to a document that said, "We will." And when Nehemiah left them in that condition, he came back to a situation where they were marrying the Amorite and the Moabite women again. They had taken all of the temple supplies out of a room and brought a Sanballat guy in there who wasn't allowed in Jerusalem, but they'd brought him in there and given him a room in the temple courts. And Nehemiah I think he just had enough. And as he cleared all of that stuff up, they even had started making their own people slaves. And so those who didn't have much helped the guys who did, but had to sell their daughters to them in order to get this done. And Nehemiah was I think he must have been just really choked. And he got there and he straightened this stuff all out. And he said to the Lord, "Remember me for this, my God, and do not blot out what I have so faithfully done for the house of my God and its service." And then he did some more things. And then he says again, "Remember me for this also, my God, and show mercy to me according to your great love." And then he got rid of the foreign ladies and foreign men who were marrying into the family. And we come to the end and he said, "Remember them, my God." He's now talking about these people who had done these dastardly things about marrying foreign women and bringing all these shame into. He said, "Remember them, my God, because they defiled the priestly office and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites." So he's wanting God to remember him in favor, but he's reminding God that these guys just need a spanking. And he closes the book this way. "So I purified the priests and the Levites of every foreign and assigned everything foreign, and assigned them duties, each to his own task. I also made provision for contributions of wood at designated times and for the first fruits." So he brought them right back to their first promises of God with their tithing, with their care of the priests, with their care of the temple, their care of the gatekeepers. And then he's finished with these words, "God, remember me with favor." As we leave here this morning, I would like us all to pray that prayer. God, please remember me with favor.
Well, you can turn in your hymn books to 333. And let's just sing third and fourth verse, please. Though sorrows befall us and Satan oppose, God leads his dear children along. Through grace we can conquer, defeat all our foes. God leads his dear children along. Some through the water, some through the flood, some through the fire, but all through the blood. Some through great sorrow, but God gives a song in the night season and all the day long. Verse 4. Away from the mire and away from the clay, God leads his dear children along. Away up in glory, eternity's day, God leads his dear children along. Some through the water, some through the flood, some through the fire, but all through the blood. Some through great sorrow, but God gives a song in the night season and all the day long.
Thanks, Jack. Thank you, Gerry, for that message. That'll close us out to those